Welcome everyone. Really lovely to see you all here on Zoom, and as I've just said, this talk is about the big picture of how the Bumblebee Conservation Trust has worked across Wales in the past and is continuing now and into the future. Okay, so my name is Clare Flynn, for those of you who don't know, and I'm actually have a very specific role as Project Officer for Skills for Bees Cymru, and there will be more on that later. So tonight we will look at bumblebees in Wales, so not what we're doing, but kind of what they're doing. A little summary of past projects. This has been quite useful for me actually, because I've learned quite a bit on what we've done that I didn't know before, what we're up to now and future plans, and some thoughts about how you may wish to get involved. Okay, so that's what we'll be covering. It shouldn't take too long. So we'll start with the bees themselves. And we have 24 species in the UK. Anyone who's worked with me before, or I know some of you are pretty experienced entomologists as well, will know that we have 24 species in the UK. As far as we know at this present moment in time, we like to think we've got 23 out of the 24. So we have the common and widespread 8 species. I'm not going to go into detail about these species now, because that's for another time and another talk. But as many of you will be familiar with these 8 species and will be familiar with seeing them and identifying them as well. And in Wales, like in the UK, they are relatively common and widespread, although very recent data, questions how well even some of our common ones are doing. So just because we label them as common doesn't mean we can be complacent about how they're doing in the landscape. We have our 6 cuckoo bumblebees, which are by their very nature less abundant. They exist at lower population numbers, and in Wales they are really quite under-recorded, partly because I think it's a lack of expertise in recording, because recording the common 8 is relatively easy. Progressing on to being able to identify and separate and actually submit data on the cuckoos is a step up. I know we got a bombus through Pastrus in Montgomeryshire this year, and it was only the 11th ever county record. So yeah, very likely they're under-recorded. And then we've got the scarce and rare species, which are pretty much scarce and rare across the UK, and Wales is no exception. So the ones highlighted in yellow, the moss carder, the brown-banded carder, the large garden, the shrill carder and the red shank carder are listed in the Wales Section 7 list of species of conservation concern. So, they are recognised as being vulnerable, if you like, and having declined quite dramatically in recent decades. Monticola and Sorrowensis, the bilberry bumblebee and the broken belted bumblebee are listed under there. Sorrowensis particularly is very sparsely recorded in Wales. I saw my first specimens of this summer behind Pets at Home in Port Talbot, believe it or not, on a scrap of post-industrial wasteland. And it was so exciting, absolutely beautiful species. And Monticola, the bilberry bumblebee, it's thought to be in decline, but we don't kind of really know. And then Cryptarum and Magnus are sort of cryptic species of the white-tailed bumblebee. Bombus lucorum, see that little star there? Bombus lucorum, Cryptarum and Magnus are actually pretty much indistinguishable in the field, so we don't really know how they're doing. So you know, that's many levels above sort of our activities in biological recording. Really, those are DNA based species for ID. So hopefully we've got 23 out of 24, but we don't quite know, and I will go into a little bit more detail of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you just more detail about the scarce and rare species. So that's the 5 section 7 species plus the broken belted bumblebee and the bilberry bumblebee. And these maps are from a project called Welsh Landscapes for Rare Bumblebees, which has literally just been completed, and it's a lovely piece of work. It's going to be so helpful for my project particularly, but more widely for bumblebee conservation. And I will give you details of the project which produced these maps in a bit. But basically what I'm trying to illustrate on these next few slides is how those scarce and rare species have declined in Wales in the last few decades. Okay, so the mosscarder, Bombus muscorum, and I know some of you found these with me in the summer, which was really exciting. But there's been a significant decline. It's never been, you know, a ubiquitous, widespread species. But basically on that map, the yellow squares indicate records from before 1980. The orange, which are a bit hard to see, I have to say, are 1980 to 2000, and the red are post 2000. So what you're looking at basically is the red is the current range, and anywhere where there's orange and yellow would have been the extent of its range prior to 2000 and then prior to 1980. So these maps are a bit of a time-lapse thing, and the squares are 10-kilometre squares. So for recording, for illustration of these records, we're using 10-kilometre squares. Okay, so muscorum has definitely declined. We do still record it though, and it has a propensity for species-rich grassland, often things like Ross pasture, quite damp grassland, often quite dense. Okay, so it's disappeared largely from inland Wales. Very closely sort of aligned species in terms of ecology, but not quite the same as the brown-banded carder. And the map is same key. So the yellow, you can see those squares have been lost in the current data set, but it's still quite prevalent in South Wales. And actually, like my colleague and the other Sinead often says, it's a bit of a secret, but brown-banded carder seems to be doing really well in South Wales. Okay, so it also likes this species-rich habitat. It's a late emerging species, a bit like mosscarder and shrill carder, but it tends to favour more open grassland and drier habitats. Okay, so slightly different, but they often occur in similar places. Lovely species. You get to the point in South Wales now when you're out on survey days going, oh, another brown-banded carder, another brown-banded carder, even though they are actually, you know, a section 7 species. Now, Rudarrius, I've never knowingly seen. So you can see that it was never widespread in Wales if we look at the historical data, but it has become even less so. I'm sure it will have been recorded this year, but I don't know about any records yet from this year. And it's something that, you know, it's a species that has become really quite rare across the UK. If any of my colleagues find one, they'll always sort of let us all know about it, because yeah, we rarely see them. And again, you know, all of this decline is very much habitat based, because if you look at these aren't species that have adapted well to urban environments, gardens, the kind of landscape that we have in our, you know, in our agricultural landscape. These are species that really need those species rich grasslands, which are the thing that we've lost most of. And then shrillcarder, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with. I know some of you are, because you've been out and we've been out together this year. But it's probably, with the great yellow in Scotland, one of two of the UK's most threatened species, potentially on the brink of extinction. And I will talk to you more about that after this section, about what we're kind of involved with in terms of shrillcarder. It's a bit of a flagship species, and it now only occurs in 5 populations in the UK, and 3 of those are in Wales. So we've got the Gwent Levels, which is probably the strongest, most extensive and best monitored population. We've got Kenfig, Port Talbot, Bridgend area here, where they're definitely still there. We saw lots of them. Well, lots, that's the wrong, that's completely inaccurate, but we recorded them in some number this summer, but we don't really know how they're doing there. And similarly on Castle Martin, very well-known population. A lot of eminent people have studied this, but we still really don't know how it's doing. So yes, very fragile existence that species has, because as long as those populations are separated, which we think they currently are, then yeah, they can't interbreed and disperse amongst each other, so they become more and more vulnerable. And then Rudarrius, the large garden bumblebee. I know some of my colleagues see quite a lot of these in southeast England. I've never seen one. And you can see in Wales it was always rare, but now it's incredibly rare, or possibly not here, we don't know. So this is one that it would be amazing to find out if it was still here, but it was last recorded in 2002. Okay, so Rudarrius, it is one of our Section 7 species, but yeah, incredibly rare in Wales. Okay, and I'll just show you the 2 that aren't on the Section 7 list, but are really important in terms of getting more data. So this is the broken-belted bumblebee, Bombus soroensis, and you can see it is very sparsely recorded in Wales. Doesn't necessarily represent its distribution though, because this species is incredibly hard to distinguish from more common species like the bufftail and the whitetail. So it may be that this species is doing better than we think, and that it is under-recorded. We just don't know. So this is one of the focus species for my project. And like I say, so delighted this summer to find it in Port Talbot, although the site is actually earmarked for development. So yeah, it wasn't all good news, but soroensis, the broken-belted bumblebee, that's one that we need to give more people the skills to identify really and look out for. And then the bilberry bumblebee, that map looks much more positive. This, as its name suggests, tends to be closely associated with upland habitat, but not always. It can be found on coastal heath as well. The queens tend to be very picky in wanting to be foraging on bilberry, but the workers and the males are much more generalist, and they will require a sort of extensive and varied forage once the bilberry has gone over. I think this is potentially under-recorded in Wales as well. because it was never recorded in Pembrokeshire before myself and Liam Old started looking for it here, but it is actually all across the Preseli Hills. So I think this is one we can really focus on and hopefully get a much better picture, and who knows, maybe a more positive picture, because this map does show loss of the species in quite a lot of 10k squares, but I have a feeling when we get people recording more, we will gain some squares, certainly around mid Wales and hopefully parts of North Wales as well. Okay, so that's a little bit of a snapshot of our rare and scarce species and our lovely maps from the Welsh Landscapes project. This is just a quick cut and paste out of my database, just to say to you all, we need more data. We need more records. So that's what you know, my Bumblebee database looks like in Excel. But yeah, we need more of that submitted to get a better picture of how these bees are doing. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to take a little step back and I'm going to go right back to the Bumblebee Conservation Trust itself as an organisation. We are a UK-wide charity, and it came out of Stirling University in 2006, where Professor Dave Goulson was working as an academic at the time, and his associate, Dr. Ben Darville. And he was inspired to move from that academic world to reach out to the wider public and the conservation sector to highlight the plight of bumblebees, as then their numbers, their populations had crashed basically over the span of the 20th century. 2 species became extinct during that time, and 8 of our 24 are currently struggling, but the picture, you know, is complicated for all of them, especially with climate change now as well coming into the mix with habitat loss. So the Bumblebee Conservation Trust was formed, and it's now in Dave Goulson's office up in Stirling, and it's now quite a big organisation with, I think there's probably between 40 and 50 of us staff, and we have 2 offices, but most of our staff, like myself, are dotted all around the country in their own homes, working from home and working remotely with each other. So the vision is a world where bumblebees are thriving and valued, and of course that reaches out to all of their habitats and all the other insects and flowers and things that are associated with bumblebees. And the mission is to increase the number and distribution of bumblebees in the UK. Our new strategy, well, not so new now actually, 2 years in, has 4 main aims: to enhance the understanding of bumblebee ecology and conservation. That's obviously really important through outreach and education and training. Increase the quality and quantity of bumblebee habitat, so that's your nitty-gritty on the ground conservation, land management, land advice, etc., and working with landowners and organisations. Inspire and enable a diverse range of people to take action for bumblebees, so that could be anything from, you know, growing bumblebee friendly flowers on a windowsill or a balcony to taking up a bee walk, etc. And, you know, looking a bit more inward is for us to be effective and sustainable, which all of our staff, I think, have worked really hard to do. So, you know, we're involved in all sorts of initiatives about lowering our carbon footprint and all sorts of things. So it's a really lovely organisation to work for, I must say. I really love it. And there are some pictures from some of my past work with the Trust, but I'll come on to that in a bit more detail now. So bee walking, planting containers, and investigating amazing habitats. That top picture is a lovely meadow up in I think it was Northern Carmarthenshire a couple of years ago. Right, okay, so what have we done up until now? This was, like I say, a really useful exercise for me, because I knew some of it, but not all of it. So there was a UK-wide project, 2011 to 2015, called Bees for Everyone. That was before my time, but that was very effective. It was very much an outreach project in terms of widening the scope's reach to people and spreading the word about bumblebees, but it did also involve a lot of land management advice as well. And in Wales, I don't remember the numbers, but you know, so many hectares received like direct support and advice about managing for bumblebees and other pollinators. And it sort of, this project transformed the whole trust at a UK level. So that was like the first big project. In Wales, a full-time conservation officer working within Bees for Everyone as well came into being, if you like, in 2012. So we had a dedicated Wales conservation officer, Sinead Lynch, and Sinead still works for the Trust. She's now a conservation manager and she covers the whole of the UK now. But she had a very, very diverse role, but a huge part of that was providing land management advice. So it was very much about direct conservation on the ground. Sinead also sort of created and delivered the first part of Be Wild West Wales, which was, well, you can see the dates, 2016 to 2018, and that was focused very much on Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion, so it was a West Wales project, and I came on board, if you like, to finish the last sort of third to a half of that project in 2017, and that had two bits. Half of it was all about engagement, and that was my little play group gang up in Aberystwyth, planting bulbs in the local park, and the other half was about training and bee walk, so it's skills for bees. So it had two strands which Sinead and I delivered between us, and that was a really, really nice project, but it was focused just on those three counties. Pasture for Pollinators has just finished in spring this year. I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And that's not had such an outward reach to the wider public, but it was actually working with the Calon Wen farms. So you all know the Calon Wen Dairy Cooperative, the organic dairy. They came and partnered with us for this project, which I will go into a bit more detail in a sec. Really lovely project. It's had some really great outcomes. We're just finishing Pollinating the Levels, which again, Sinead and I delivered this between us. It was part of the Living Levels project in Newport, and Pollinating the Levels, well, some of you that are online now this evening know more about this than I do, because you were involved with it longer. But basically our bit of Pollinating the Levels was all about land management, conservation activities, for example, green haying, creating new grasslands. And my bit of it was working with a fantastic group of volunteers all summer to do Bumblebee ID training, recording and set up bee walks on the levels, and it was an absolute joy, and we finished that on the 3rd of September. But hopefully there's a lot of legacy there, because it is such an important habitat for bumblebees, and we've got lots of very keen recorders there now, working away, who hopefully I will engage with now with the project that I'm delivering at the moment. And then I delivered a tiny little project, just 3 months worth in 2019, which is where I met some of you, which was Skills for Bees, and that was focused on shrill carder habitat in the Bridgend area and Pembrokeshire area, and that was purely about training and recording and blitzing those two shrill carder populations. Okay, so that was a little mini project really that I delivered, which was a really nice piece of work and which formed the basis for what I deliver now. Okay, so that's what we've done. That's all ticked off and done. And I'm just going to tell you a bit about this because I found this quite interesting, and I thought you might too. So a partnership with Calon Wen, and this was delivered by my colleague Anna Hobbs, who still works with us on another project. And it basically, it looked at how simple changes to land management on productive commercial farms, so changes such as grasslands, silage leaves, hedgerows, tracksides, field margins, all those messy bits on the farm, wetlands, how they can be tweaked to benefit bumblebees more, whilst actually allowing those farms to be productive and sustainable and profitable. Because obviously those two things at times are pulled apart, and this was a project that looked at how we can pull those things together. And they did trials of different things and were able to monitor them over time and come up with recommendations from those trials. So they looked at benefits of leaving uncut margins in various parts of the farm for bumblebees and other pollinators. And they also started to establish bee walks to start monitoring how those changes affected the bumblebees. Obviously, that's a long-term thing, and I'll come back to that in a minute because we do need some help with that. And at the end of the project, Anna and the Calon Wen community produced a bilingual guide to pollinator-friendly grassland farming. And obviously this has wider applications beyond Calon Wen, and the guide has case studies, and habitat management signs have also been erected on those farms. That guide is available on our website, so I can send that link if anybody wants it. But yeah, this has been a really successful project, and we often don't hear so much about the projects that go on in this sort of farming context. We hear about the more public facing things, but actually in terms of the wider landscape, this is obviously massively important because this is the vast majority of our landscape. Okay, so that was Pastures for Pollinators, which is all wrapped up now. And that brings us on neatly to our current and future plans. So first of all, following on from Pasture for Pollinators, we've now got Calon Wen, and I'm going to go into detail of all of these, and Anna Hobbs is continuing to deliver that for the next 3 years, which builds on all the success of Pastures for Pollinators. We've got Skills for Bees Cymru, which is, well, I call it my project. I don't own it, but that's what I'm delivering for the next 3 years alongside Anna, which is all about training and data. We've got Welsh Landscapes for Rare Bees, which has been done and dusted this summer, and I will tell you all about that in a sec, which I think it's a brilliant piece of work, quite excited by it. We've got our Bristlecarder conservation strategy, which spans all of the UK populations, but obviously is very important within Wales, which is a 10-year strategy. And we've got Natur am Byth, which is currently in its development phase. So that is where we are at. So we've actually got quite a lot going on. What we haven't got that we used to have is a full-time Wales member of staff that is dedicated purely to providing general advice, answering all the Welsh queries, and just overseeing what's happening in Wales. So we lost our full-time conservation officer. So we have Anna, our part-time one, but she's totally focused on Calon Wen. So even though we've got a lot more going on a project level, currently we haven't got, I'm the nearest thing we've got. but my role is taken up massively with my project. So, you know, my ability to answer all sorts of queries coming in Wales is quite limited, unfortunately. So I'm going to take each one of those. So Calon Gwenyn, as I said, is built on pastures for pollinators, still working with Calon Wen. Okay. And what we're aiming to do is to take that guide that Anna produced with the Calon Wen gang, if you like, and actually disseminate that information and give farmers the support to try and implement measures within that guide and that came out of that project. So we're not just going to sort of produce the guide and then finish. We've now got the opportunity to support farmers more, and also to reach out to other farms beyond the Calon Wen farms, which is really important, because actually farms don't have to be organic to be brilliant bumblebee habitats. You know, they really don't. So there's a further application from all of these results that Anna has produced. She's going to do some online training webinars, which I'm hoping to help her with for farmers as well, as part of Calon Gwenyn. And to start building pollinator-friendly farm clusters around those Calon Wen flagship farms where the farmers are really, really engaged. Okay, and there's quite a few of those. I mean, she's had such a positive experience with the Calon Wen farms. And then I'm going to come in on a bit of this, because we've had quite a lot of our farmers wanting bee walk monitoring transects on these farms. Be such a good opportunity to get some monitoring where they're implementing habitat changes. So I'm going to be looking to help Anna, and I will be looking for volunteers who live nearby who might be interested in walking bee walks on these beautiful organic farms. So that's Calon Gwenyn. So I know this is a lot of information on these slides. I hope it's, you know, offering you a good overview of where we're going and where you might want to get involved as well. So my project, like I said, it was built on the little mini skills for bees I did 2 years ago, and it's very generously funded by the Moondance Foundation, which is a charitable trust. I love being funded by Moondance. You know, it sounds quite, I don't know, esoteric. It's a nice idea, moon dancing. So we've got that funding, and the drive of my project is totally about getting data, more data. We need more information on our Welsh bumblebees. We need more information on all of the species, including the common ones. We need information on specific ones like the bilberry and broken belted and large garden bumblebee, where we don't really know how they're doing, because we haven't probably got records reflecting their true distribution. But we also have huge geographical holes in our data, which I'll come back to in a minute. Basically, we have more recorders in certain areas. So one of my aims that I've been given, one of my targets, is to have more bee walks across Wales that are walked by people who are comfortable and confident in what they're doing and are well supported, and we are hopefully over the next 2 years going to be implementing more things to support our bee walk volunteers, which I'll come to at the end of the talk, so that we have a really good bumblebee recording community across Wales. And that includes submitting records on an ad hoc basis as well, not just through bee walk. So as I've already said, we want to focus on filling our knowledge gaps, particularly in areas with few or no bee walk records or wider data. And I'll give you some evidence and maps on that in a bit. My key themes that I developed in starting this project was I want to build awareness of bumblebees. I want to work in partnership with organisations and groups, you know, friends of groups, volunteer groups, work in partnership wherever I possibly can. I want to deliver effective training. I want to see new data, and I want to be able to mentor new volunteers and support them and help them as they gain skills. And that's final point, I think, is something that we haven't had capacity to do in the trust in the past, and I hope we will be able to do that more in Skills for Beakers Cymru. So that's my project. That's the kind of rationale, if you like, behind my project. And most of you are aware, you know, I've completed my first season, and I've managed to work with a lot of people. We've had training. I've really enjoyed working with groups on a regular basis rather than doing one-offs. Highlights are definitely the number of bee walks that have been taken up in Wales, which is probably about 20 new bee walks this summer. Considering that my target for the whole project was 15 for 3 years, 5 per year, I'm really pleased. And Bombus toroensis in Eastport Talbot was definitely my highlight record of the season, though we did have moss carder and brown-banded carder and some cuckoos and shrill carder as well. So it's been a really lovely and exciting season. Okay, stay with me, folks. Not far to go now. So Welsh landscapes for rare bees. The trust had identified that we generally lack data in Wales, as I've already said, partly due to the fact that all that previous trust work that I talked about, work we've done in the past, a lot of that has been focused in the, if you like, the M4 corridor in South Wales. We've had it's been due to the projects that we've had funded, and also where the conservation officer was based, and all sorts of reasons. But we've had a lot of input in the trust in South Wales over the years, and hardly any input beyond sort of, you know, the heads of the valleys road, if you like. So Mid and North Wales haven't had the trust working within them, apart from occasional forays that we've had, one-off events and things. So we haven't trained as many people. And a lot of these areas are also very low in population. But traditionally, there's been a lot of bumblebee recording in South Wales, and we have big gaps in the data beyond that. And we recognise this. And part of my project was to try and collate all of the bumblebee data we have for Wales at the current time and use it as a basis to work out what we need to do. But actually we got funding to do that, and we commissioned the local record centres across Wales to do this piece of work, which was brilliant because I could never ever have achieved what they've achieved. So it was funded by Welsh Government National Lottery. Like it says there, the status of bumblebees in Wales is generally poorly understood. So we commissioned the local environmental record centres to draw together data sets on bumblebees that had been lying on hard drives and goodness knows where for years and years and years, and had never been brought together. And they were hugely successful in doing that. And they brought all these data sets together, and then they did some analysis and produced some amazing maps. Now, feel free that the maps aren't that easy to get your head round, and it is late, but this will just give you a flavour. We did look at all bumblebee species in these maps, but we had a focus on those rare and scarce, those 7 we've already gone through. And the maps I showed you earlier, apart from that data set, so we were able to show where those species are still occurring in Wales and where we've lost those species in certain 10 kilometre squares as time has gone by. But they produced a lot of other maps as well. including species coincidence maps, which I'll show you in a sec, recorder intensity, and really importantly for me, habitat association maps, which I'll show you in a sec. Now, this report is a really, really good read. It's really interesting. It's a bit heavy in places and the maps get quite complicated, but have a little look. Sinead, if you could put that link in the in this chat, Sinead. There's a project page on the website, and that link is on the project page. So, for example, this map on the right shows, if you consider we have 23 species in Wales, we think. So these numbers show how many species have been recorded in each square. So the darkest red has the most number of our bumblebee species in Wales. So the darkest red are really, really diverse squares in terms of records. Going up the colour scale, that's, 15 to 18 species occur in the slightly paler ones. Then the orangey, 10 to 14, pale orange at 6 to 9 species. And the yellow squares have only ever had, to the knowledge of this report, one to 5 species in. So there you might say, on a very simple level, appear to be the least diverse squares. Now, there are 2 squares here in Mid Wales which had no bumblebee records in at all. Now, one of them now has 1 record in it, which I didn't get in time because on my way back from a field day, I stopped in one of those squares and I recorded a buff-tailed bumblebee in a churchyard just to be contrary and to get a record in one of those squares. Now, that is now showing up on the database, but it didn't when they did the analysis, which is really annoying. So there remains 1 square in Wales with no bumblebee records in it. And of course, it's not that it doesn't have any bumblebees, it's just nobody has recorded bumblebees. And what can we take from this map? The south is diverse in species. Yes, it is. These areas less diverse, possibly. They're upland areas, a lot of these. They haven't probably got the coastal grasslands that we've got down here, but then this is around the Brecon Beacons. These areas here, slightly less diverse if you look at the numbers. There's a lot of recorder effort in these areas. And we've got some super keen recorders in South Wales. I know Abby's online today. We've got Liam, lots of people from the National Museum of Wales over the years. So how much of this reflects diversity and how much reflects recorder effort? A bit of both, probably. So these maps are really interesting. Oh, this one's really complicated. So don't worry too much about this, but if you look at the numbers in this map, the actual figures, these represent the number of records in each 10 kilometre square in Wales. So you can see down here on the Gwent levels, we've got like here 1,000. Oh, this is like well into the hundreds. And a little bit around the North Wales coast, actually, there's some really good. I think the Great Orme, I wonder if is really, really, oh yeah, that's the Great Orme, 1,668. And I think there's one particular person I've been told in North Wales is probably responsible for loads of those records. So yeah, basically the red ones on here show where the rare species are, and the blue ones are squares with no rare species in, or rare or scarce. So the blue ones represent, you know, very low recorded squares, for squares with not much habitat. I don't know. And this is what my project aims to find out. So it's using this data to get more data. These maps are absolutely brilliant. They don't work that well in some ways visually, but basically this is a habitat association map for the brown-banded carderbee. And what the project did was they worked out the preferred sort of primary habitats for each of our rare and scarce species. So they worked out a core habitat, which it seemed to favour, and then a supporting habitat, which it would also be found in. And this map, basically, the grey squares represent post the last 20 years of records, which is all I've got showing on here. And you can see how it corresponds to this species preferred habitat. So the habitat, the core habitat, is in red. These little, I hope you can see that okay, these little strips of red. So for the brown-banded carderbee, it's all going to represent nice coastal grasslands, mostly. And it does, you can see the species occurs, but there's lots of areas where we have this habitat. For example, the north coast of Anglesey, north coast of Pembs, maybe around Pembrey Abbey is a hot spot, I reckon, where it isn't occurring. So this gives me, in my project, and any keen recorders out there, an absolutely brilliant place to think, right, these areas here around Harlech, Morfa Dyffryn, I think we've got rare bees there. That's my hypothesis. And I want to go and look for them because there's loads of habitat, but no records. So these maps are going to be so good for our future recording efforts. And this little table, which I couldn't manipulate to make it easier to see, I'm afraid, but I'll explain it. So here are our rare and scarce species, just to admit Dave into the talk. Here are our rare and scarce species as I've gone through. And what the project has come up with are these areas where we need to look for these species. So the squares are priority areas for survey. The ticks are where we know they're there, okay? So the black squares are where we need to look, the ticks we know are there. So priority areas, eastern valleys, and obviously for different species. Brecon Beacons National Park, there are so few bumblebee records in Brecon Beacons National Park, it's unbelievable. So that's one of my target areas for me anyway. Brecon Beacons National Park Central and South. Bridgend Coastal Dunes, Gower, Gower is very under-recorded. Carmarthenshire Coast, Pendine, Pembrey. South Pembs, Castlemartin. North Pembs Coast, that's under-recorded, I know, within my county where I live. West Wales coastline, so that's sort of Aberystwyth and up towards Harlech, up towards West Wales. Cambrian Mountains, Snowdonia the National Park. We have no bee walks at all in Snowdonia either. Bala to Corwen, South Gwynedd Coast, Harlech, as I said, Llyn Peninsula, Anglesey Coast, and I never know how to, Llywodian Range and the D Estuary, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. So now we've got these target areas where we've got some prime bumblebee habitat, but very few records. So this has been a lovely project, and I will be using this to target my training and my surveys next year. Okay, I'm going to go. I hope, like I say, I hope you're all still with me. Bit lighter now. Some nice pictures. So the Bristlecarder recovery strategy is a 10-year conservation strategy for this species, and currently is managed by my colleague Bex, who I know some of you have met. And this is across the UK populations. And Bex has kindly lent me some slides that she uses. So the vision for this strategy, it is 2050. The shrill carder bee is thriving with sustainable populations that are spreading and connecting across a network of flower-rich landscapes. So that is the long-term vision. So everything that is written in this strategy hangs upon that vision in terms of landscape, habitat regeneration, and working with stakeholders and connectivity across landscapes, etc. The strategy was developed with a lot of partners, with a lot of input, with many people and organisations, which are there on the slide, that have been involved with shrill carder bee conservation. And the document is available again on our website. So do have a look at that. Again, it's a really interesting read. And Bex is rolling the beginning of that strategy out at the moment, and she's been working with me this summer on I just feed in terms of helping with surveying in those populations, etc., and making sure we've got monitoring. So Bex has 6 strategy goals, which are quite interesting. No net loss of occupied area. So we want to save what we've got, which is very fragmented. So it's really, really important. Habitat resources for shrill carder bee are increased in size, quality, resilience and connectivity to achieve viable populations, as I said earlier. And I think we have a realistic chance of doing that in South Wales. I really do. Because I worked on a meadows project as well before this, I think there is such a momentum around grasslands, species-rich grassland, you know, development and restoration of these landscapes that I think we've got potential to connect our shrill carder populations, and wouldn't that be incredible? So populations are increasing in occupied area, abundance and viability, reducing national extinction risk, which is kind of where we're at the moment. Goal 4, shrill carder bee knowledge and understanding is increased. So that's outreach and training. Data and information is openly accessible. You know, it's not just the kind of expert few. This is something we want everybody, especially people like you who are interested, to be engaged in. Facilitating evidence-based conservation. Goal 5, key audiences having an appreciation of sense of responsibility for shrill carder bee facilitating action and protection. So that could even be a wider remit where people recognise they've got this amazing species in their locality and are proud of it. Good governance for shrill carder bee strategy will be achieved at all levels, maintaining momentum and quality in implementation. So yes, so this, you know, is an important part of our Wales work, massively important. And it is obviously a South Wales focus. But there are records of this species, historical ones further north, so never say never. And Natur Ambith is just about to kick off. You will see more and more about this in the coming months. I think we're just about to interview for our development officer. And this project is all about species that are basically on the edge, species that are on the verge of possible extinction, that are massively declined. And it is a huge partnership project. I don't know if you've heard from Back from the Brink, which was the English equivalent. And we're now launching our Wales version of Back from the Brink, and it is going to be focused on individual species with individual conservation organisations each taking responsibility for their species. So the shrill carder will be ours, and we will be implementing the goals of Natur Ambith with shrill carder as our flagship. But obviously it has far more reaching effects than just these individual species, and there will be lots of public engagement, lots of community involvement, and sort of engaging the wider Wales population, the conservation of Welsh wildlife. So that is literally just about to start, and you know, be really exciting to have that Welsh Development Officer on board soon. So that is where we're at. That's kind of looking to the future of what we're doing in Wales at the moment. And now I'm just going to run through opportunities for you to get involved. Most of you already are, because I only put this meeting out to my mailing list. It didn't get advertised widely. So with opportunities to get involved, I have so many people ask me about being involved and volunteering and helping, and some amazing people, and I would like to say yes to everyone, but because we haven't got a permanent long-term member of staff in Wales, it's quite hard to manage that side of things, if you like, to manage volunteers or to have a community of volunteers, because it does need staff involvement. But I am really keen to move forward on this in Wales, and we are really lucky because we've just had appointed a senior, what's his title? Senior volunteer coordinator, who's going to work across the trust. So he's based in England, but he's Welsh, and his name's Rudarrius, and he's wonderful. And he's very experienced. He's worked for the trust already for 3 years. And Rudarrius and I do plan to get together and have a strategic think about how we can set up a more sort of supported volunteer base in Wales. And of course, volunteering can mean anything. It can be helping me with a newsletter. It could be, I know there's at least one of you on here that might want to do some talks for us. It could be just helping me with a talk like this evening. It could be doing a stand at the Bill's Welsh show. It could be doing a bee walk. It could be doing anything that you would enjoy as a volunteer. So we are going to have more support and hopefully more opportunities for you to get involved more formally. So some of these options could be getting involved with my project. There's going to be loads of training and ID and surveys anyway, so you can get involved with that if you haven't already. You don't have to, you know, sign up to be a volunteer. You can just get involved. So I will be putting out more information over the coming months of things you can attend online if you haven't already. Calon Gwenyn, I am going to be putting out requests for bee walkers specifically on Calon Wen farms to work with myself and Anna on monitoring. So that's something that we will be looking at. Natur am Beth, obviously we don't quite know yet. That's heading for development, but there might well be opportunities there for all sorts of volunteer activities. And then, as I just mentioned, I know there's a couple of you online tonight who are registered volunteers, and Louise, who's one of those, will laugh at my thing about leaflets there. So it could be volunteers can have leaflets, you could give them out at all sorts of things, you know, your village fete, whatever it is, give out leaflets, give out membership leaflets, etc., etc. Helping me with field days, blah, 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 lots, the list is endless. And as I said, Rudarrius will be joining us. So what I'm going to ask people to do, if you'd like, because we're in a bit of flux with this at the moment, and we need to develop it more, what I thought I'd do is, if you'd like to become a registered volunteer with the trust, and there's no commitment, even if you do that, you know, there's no commitment, or if you'd like to find out more, just send me an email with volunteering in the subject line, and I will put it in my volunteer folder. And then when Rudarrius and I get together, we can contact those people and have a think about what we can do. We are also going to be developing a volunteer learning platform on Moodle. Don't know if you've heard of Moodle. A lot of colleges and universities use it, and that's going to have all sorts of information on it, and Rodri will be developing that. You know, that's going to come online quite soon. I would think early next year. We've got a meeting about that next week. So there's going to be more involvement for volunteers. Okay. And that is, some of you will recognise that chocolate bee. So this bumblebee was created by one of our lovely volunteers, Louise, at one of our events in the summer. It is actually, I reckon, an early bumblebee male, because she's been very particular with her colour banding. And he's got a little yellow nose there at the front. Not that they have noses, but so that's the sort of thing you can enjoy, you see, coming out on events. A chocolate heart bumblebees, as well as all the real bumblebees buzzing around. Okay, so I'm going to stop. I hope that was okay and useful for you. I'm going to stop screen share.